with meet our own needs, but not compromising the future generations. So transport depends on petroleum in the world, and yet half of total resource of conventional petroleum will have been consumed by 2025. Next, please. What about the international agenda? All countries are worried about this subject because, as you know, traditional mobility consumes a lot of petroleum and has some impacts in environment, in social, and in economic aspects. So the agenda that all the countries are related to some policies that is, for example, to have that people have access to the transport, to be efficient in the means of transport, also the safety, because the world aims to reduce the fatalities in roads, and the environment, minimizing the footprint of mobility. Greenhouse gases are caused by traditional means of transport. So all the countries are looking for a sustainable means of transport to reduce those impacts. Next, please. Some milestones are that worldwide we are celebrating the Bicycle Day on the 3rd June and the World Car Free Day on 22 September. Those are dates by the United Nations, and all the countries are making some celebrations and activities around these dates. About the global efforts on sustainable mobility, those are some facts that are important to know. 1 billion people have no access to an all-weather road. 70% of the fuel energy is lost during the combustion of the engine. The number of vehicles that road expected to double to 2 billion by 2050. And the death rate in roads are increased 32% in low-income countries as Peru. And the transport also is responsible for 23% of energy-related greenhouse gases emissions. And that is why creating sustainable transportation solutions is one of the greatest challenges facing cities today. And this is a very good opportunity. And now we are in a very complicated context for the COVID. And sustainable mobility is also a great opportunity to transport people in a safer way. Next, please. Those are the results of Lima Como Vamos. There is a survey about mobility and how people feel and think about transport in Lima. Most of people in Lima use public transport, but the level of occupancy of private cars is only 1.5 people per ride. Only 14.2% of people walk or ride a bike to work or school. Despite Lima is a flat city and sometimes we are close to some facilities as schools or work or supermarkets or whatever, we use the car sometimes to go to transport for only 1 or 2 kilometers, and it is not sense to do that anymore. 20.8% of Limeños indicated that it takes more than 1 hour each trip. And since the beginning of the annual studies of Lima Como Vamos, vehicle pollution has remained the city's main environmental problem. everybody is agree with that fact, and everybody recognize the transport as the main source of pollution of the air in Lima. Non-sustainable mobility has impact in people, not only for the air pollution, but also for the time that we spent in some traffic jams, for example. But air pollution caused 4 million deaths, for example, in 2016, according to the World Health Organization. The lack of sustainable mobility also increases stress, allergies, and respiratory problems. And all in general, this lack of quality of the air reduces life expectancy. Regarding the economy, we lost a lot of time in traffic jams in big cities. Maybe now that we are in a context of the pandemic, we don't feel the traffic as we used to, but this is a very important economic aspect because we lose time standing in the traffic and not working, for example, so it has economical impact for the country. Increase the cost also due to the health problems and due to unsustainable mobility, the air and water cleanup is reduced. And the impact on the planet, because of transport is the fastest growing source of fossil fuel CO2 emissions and the most contributor to the climate change. And finally, the acidification of air and increase of acid rain due to the pollutants that are created in the explosion of the engine. Next, please. We will see some means of sustainable transport that, for example, carpool and bicycle, that are the main topics in this talk. It's very interesting because in a survey in this context of COVID, 32% of people who use public transport is before the quarantine indicate that they will move around the bicycle, and also 11% who use car are more willing to use the bicycle as vehicle because it's safer. And 70% of the surveys consider that the bicycle is a good option, but there are still some barriers to use it. And security is the most important barrier that we have to face to use the bicycle in a global way. Next, please. And we will talk now about carpool, and Bernardo from Chile will talk about how technology can help us to make this carpool happen.
Thanks, Claudia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Bernardo Batigalupo. I'm co-founder and CEO of Allright. Let me talk a little bit about us. Next slide, please. Allright is a shared mobility platform. We develop mobility solutions for both companies and final users. We have a mix of services like the ones you can see in the slides, and we have a mixed business model with both B2B and B2C support. Today we will focus in carpool specifically, which is my personal favorite because of the huge impact or huge potential impact it has on daily mobility within cities. So one more, please. So this is how commuting looks like for billions of people worldwide who waste a lot of time each day traveling alone in their cars in the huge, in the peak hour traffic, right? Probably most of us have been in that situation before, and we definitely think that we can do way better than that. So, Allright makes commuting fun and cheaper. Then next slide, please. Fun and cheaper, helping you share your rides and expenses with people heading your same way, but with people you actually like or could have a relationship with. I mean, this is not like a taxi service. Here you can actually choose who do you want to share your ride with, and that is true for both the drivers and the passengers. This is a social platform, right? So next, please. So on top of the intangible benefits of the travel experience, there are very tangible ones in two very relevant variables, which are the time and the money. The passengers can save an average of 40% in their travel times compared to other modes like public transportation, and the drivers can save an average of 60% of the travel costs sharing them with the riders. So everybody wins with a more efficient use of the resources. In this case, the resources are the empty seats on the cars on trips that are going to happen anyways, right? So in a wider perspective, the carpool has these benefits at a social level that are resumed in the image at the next slide, please. In this image, that when you make carpool massive, you basically need less rides to move the same people, and with less rides you have less cars in the roads, and thus you can minimize the traffic, the pollution, and the transportation cost, but now the cost of each ride is split between more people. And a very important too, you can better balance the public space usage in favor of more efficient modes, which are basically every other mode that is more efficient than the car, but specifically a massive public transit and the bicycle. Next, please. So for a wider perspective, let's see how this fits in the three revolutions of the motorized transportation that are these. The first is the electrification of vehicles that just cares about which type of energy we use to actually move the vehicle. So we will move from a fossil fuel combustion system to an electric system. So this will reduce the CO2 emissions. The second revolution is the autonomous vehicles that only cares about who is responsible to actually drive the car. So now the cars are driven by humans, and in the future will be driven by a software, right? And this is completely independent from the first one. You can have fossil fuels powered autonomous vehicles or electric autonomous vehicles, but it's very common to many people put them on the same box. And the third one is the shared vehicles that only cares about how many people is sharing the vehicle simultaneously in the same ride in order to make a more efficient use of the resources. So below you can see the potential impact of each one of those revolutions. If you combine the first two, you have a potential of 63% reduction in CO2 emissions, 100% explained by the first revolution, passing from combustion to electric, and a 0% traffic reduction. In fact, many experts think that the autonomous vehicle may cause an increase in traffic, because traffic is often explained by solo drivers, and now we can have vehicles with zero person in it. I mean, maybe I left my lunch at home and I can send my vehicle to pick it up. So that will be a problem. But maybe with goodwill, we can think of it as neutral in terms of traffic. But as you can see below, if you add the effect of the shared vehicle, we have a potential of 20 percentage points on top of the other, of 85% of CO2 emissions, and up to 76% in traffic reduction. So the impact is really, really high, and that's the one that we should be focusing right now. I mean, maybe it's not the more sexiest of those revolution, but it's by far the one that has the higher potential. Next, please. So let's look at an example with numbers. This is data from Santiago in Chile. This is the modal share of what we call the on-wheels commuting. That means excluding walking. So you can see how high the private car usage is. It's way higher than Lima, from what I saw in the previous slide showed by Claudia. But along with public transportation are by far the most preferred modes in Santiago. So next, please. In terms of absolute numbers, each Labor Day, there are almost 5 million trips in private cars in Santiago, almost 5 million. And half of them, 2.5 million, are planned trips. I mean, trips for work or for study. With plans, I mean trips which routes and schedules are known in advance, and so they are really easy to coordinate to share them. So if you consider that each car has an average of 4 seats for passengers on top of the driver, we're talking about 10 million seats circulating every day in Santiago. Santiago is a city with 6.5 million people, so there are way more seats circulating each day than people in the city. Next, please. So that's the potential that can be done. So we calculated the impact of sharing those seats, and for each 1% of those seats that are shared equals to 13 $16 million in annual savings for users and 6.6 thousand tons of annual reduction in CO2 emissions. So I insist that is for every 1% of the seats that are shared. So the potential is really, really high. And I want to emphasize that this is with no direct cost for the city. It's just optimizing resources that are already available, in this case, the empty seats on the cars. Okay, so I know this sounds really promising, but in practice it's not as easy as it sounds, because there are some barriers we need to address to make this massive. Cultural barriers, the habits people have, and we need to change, but we do believe that technology will be a huge enabler to make that happen and finally have this as a massive practice. So on top of that, I'm not going to go so deep in the product because we're talking about carpooling in general, but we do believe that the approach of the technology has to correctly address the needs of the drivers that are the key piece in the model. So next, please. We have learned by experience that we have to meet this. This quote is, we know this quote is one that most of drivers can identify with, that says, I will share my ride with people I like if my schedule fits them. I mean, it's really simple. Basically, I'm saying I will keep doing the rides I need to do. If those rides happens to be useful for people I like, they are free to join me. So as long as we are able to provide a flexible enough model that honors this quote, we will be able to make this a massive practice, and that's the road we are taking. Also, it's important, next please, to have an end-to-end model to support the whole process of sharing a ride. Maybe not all of these steps are very intuitive, but I will cover quickly. The first one is the matching. I mean, you have to match people who have similar routes and schedules, and also some kind of affinity between them, so they actually want to go on the same car. The second one is the coordination, meaning that even if our schedule and routes matches, we have to coordinate which days we're actually going to share, because maybe I cannot do it one day or you cannot do it other day. So there is a coordination that needs to happen. Then is the meeting, when we actually meet at the agreed point to share the ride. Then is the the expense sharing, in case that is the agreement between the users. And after the trip, we can review our experience, so everyone can start building a reputation in the platform, and we can build a trustworthy community to encourage other people to share as well. So this is a general summary of Carpool, how it works, the potential, and how we are approaching it. And if you have any question on top, I will be happy to answer after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernardo, for that presentation. If you want to know anything additional about AllRide, you can go to their website, allrideapp.com. And if you want to do a specific question for Bernardo, please write it in the chat box. And now we're going to have Juan Carlos Silva from ACIPER talking about the new regulation of the bicycle law in Peru. I know a lot of people are very interested on non-motorized, also sustainable mobility. So Juan Carlos.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is really a pleasure for me to be here celebrating the second edition of Británico Green. Well, I was invited today to talk with you about the new regulation of the bicycle law in Peru and the opportunities of the sanitary emergency by COVID for the promotion of the use of the bicycle. It has been a while since the quarantine started, and I think we can all agree that this new reality has changed our lives. All of us have begun to value our health and much more, and we have looked for ways to preserve it. One of the things that changed with the arrival of the new virus was our way of moving without exposing ourselves to possible sources of contagion. Next slide, please. The first option is to go on foot, which is the most basic form of mobility. The next option is to go in a vehicle. Among the vehicles, we have bicycles, motorcycles, private cars, public transport, and taxis. Next, please. However, when the idea is to avoid being exposed to a virus, public transport and taxis are not an option due to the need to interact with other people in spaces that may be infected. Only private cars, motorcycles and bicycles remain as a possibility. But with an economic crisis, very few Peruvians can afford to go by car, either because its use is expensive or because they could have to buy a new car. Next slide. So when it comes to vehicles, the data provided by the National Statistical Institute is that 17.6% of households in our country have at least one bicycle, while only 13.8% have a car. In the rural context, the data shows that there are at least 3 times more bicycles than cars per home. So it could be logical to think that the best way to transport ourselves in this quarantine should be on a bicycle, since it's a cheap, safe, ecological, and efficient one-person vehicle, especially for nearby routes in the urban and rural context. In fact, it is important to mention that there has been an increase in cyclists during the quarantine period due to these factors. However, bicycle users face multiple problems daily when riding. These are the lack of infrastructure, the lack of signage, the lack of a road culture, and the lack of respect for life and integrity of the pedestrian and cyclists. This is due in part to the fact that since its inception, our roads and therefore our cities have been made with vehicles in mind rather than people. At this point, if we want to characterize the reality of cycling in an orderly manner, we could do it through this SWOT diagram, which is known as FODA diagram in Spanish, and separate the situation of the elements of analysis according to 4 criteria: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Let's start with the strengths, which in this case could be the comparative advantages that are part of this vehicle or are generated with its use, compared to other transportation alternatives, of course. Between the strengths, we have that the bicycle guarantees social distancing during transportation. It's easy to learn to drive. Its cost is really low, and it saves money. It does not generate polluting gases. It does not require documents such as a license or a property card. It keeps the user healthy, and it does not take much space on the road and parking slots. These are just some of the advantages that we can highlight. A deeper analysis would show us how many hours you can save avoiding all traffic in a rush hour, or how much you can save on passage or gasoline. How much can save someone who boosts his immune system and does not invest as much in medicines. And of course, how beneficial is someone who does not compromise the quality of the environment, creating healthy spaces for the rest of the population. And next slide, please. What follows in the diagram are the weaknesses, which are inherent characteristics of the use of the bicycle in our country, according to the current reality of both the user and the environment. Between the weaknesses, we have that the trip depends on the user capacity. That's it, how fast or far you can go depends in principle on your physical condition. Its use was not highly regulated. In fact, before the bicycle law, we were practically invisible to the traffic regulations in our country. There are few bike lanes for the users. The bike lanes that exist are in poor condition. In general, there is a poor culture of maintaining public spaces and public infrastructure in all our country. The existing routes do not connect with each other. Other users, like drivers and pedestrians, do not respect the cyclists. Many of them invite the bike lanes, nor do they accept them as drivers with the same right to use the roads. There's no and not secure parking. And that situation does not help to promote the use of the bicycle and generates potential risks for all the cyclists. And the use of the bicycle is not yet sufficiently widespread. Next slide, please. Opportunities are external situations that generate the necessary condition to benefit cycling. Among them, we have the following. The need for a transport reform allows cycling to enter the public agenda. It is important to note that public policies are based on the felt and expressed needs of the population that is affected by negative situations. There is an increasingly active and empowered community of cyclists. The civil community, organized according to interests, is much more effective when it comes to making demands on the political systems. The decision makers begin to see cyclists as an alternative. And now, more and more authorities share the view that cycling is a good thing for their communities, and this is reinforced by the current health crisis. And the last one, the global health crisis, because of the COVID, forces us to seek safe transportation alternatives. It is visible that this pandemic has generated a favorable situation, to cycling around the world, and is positioning the bicycle as a vehicle that offers a transversal solution to many problems. like economic and social problems that have increased with the health crisis. Next slide, please. Sorry. Finally, we go with the threats. These are situations and obstacles that can negatively affect the cycling and cyclists. Those are the lack of traffic cultures that implies risks for users, especially for those who are just starting using the bike. The bike lanes are taken by other actors, reducing the safe spaces for cyclists. Cycling competes with other interest groups that favor gasoline-powered vehicles. Some public authorities reject the change in favor of sustainable mobility and defend traditional models of mobility. Some cyclists reject the use of safety implements and do not promote their use. Also, some cyclists do not respect traffic rules and believe that they are for motorized vehicles only. This attitude puts their lives and the lives of others at risk, also generating negative reactions about cycling in people who observe these actions. As you can see, many of the weaknesses and threats do not come from cycling. On the contrary, they are related to social, political, and legal factors in our country. In fact, if those factors which are external to the vehicle were solved, the strengths and benefits of its use would be greater and would reach more users. Next slide, please. Due to the situation of vulnerability for pedestrians and cyclists, given the need for a paradigm shift that makes the citizen before the vehicle, and due to pressure and constant dialogue with political authorities, the last year, on April 24, the government approved Law 30936, a law that promotes and regulates the use of the bicycle as a sustainable means of transportation. This law, of only 11 articles, was the result of a joint effort between the Peruvian Cyclist Association, ACIPER, and other actors such as civil organizations, the Congress, other public and private entities, and also some embassies. This law has been the first to lay the foundations that consolidate the use of the bicycle in our country, promoting its inclusion and regulation within the national transit rules. And of course, forcing local and regional governments to adopt measures for its promotion and regulation. It also establishes June 3rd as the National Bicycle Day. Next, please. Although this law is fairly well formulated and enjoys sufficient legitimacy and consensus among the parties involved, it is important to note that, like other laws, it will not be effective until the government establishes the mechanisms to implement it in all levels of government. That means regional, in our districts, in our provinces, and in all areas of civil society. Checking the impact of this law will be impossible without establishing ways to monitor it and evaluate it, based on the feedback generated by all the actors involved. Many of the points of the law have to do with institutional changes and generation of new infrastructure. However, this will not be enough if they are not accompanied by social changes, which are more difficult to achieve and require more time, resources, and also creativity. Next. To conclude, I want to clarify that opportunities for the promotion of cycling are not based only on laws. Although they can initiate the implementation of infrastructure and provide us with guidelines for change, it is with the execution of programs and especially through the participation of all the actors involved, as I said previously, that we stop talking about laws to talk about successful public policies that generate social welfare and lay the foundations for a greener and more sustainable future. Well, that's all, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, both Bernardo and Claudia. It's been a very interesting webinar on sustainable mobility, and we've received some questions. We've received some questions through the chat box and some questions in the description. So I'm gonna just read out one for each of you now, and we'll have a few minutes to answer. I just want to say that we still need some of the participants' names and their email addresses to be able to win the raffle. There's going to be an eco pack that is going to be raffled. So if you insert your name and your email address, you'll be able to participate. So our first question is for Claudia. And well, there's been several questions around sustainable mobility and what is it and why is it important. I think you've already tackled those. But people are wondering also, what impacts do you think we're going to have in some years after COVID? No? How is COVID going to change our sustainable or unsustainable mobility? So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate a little bit on what you think is going to happen.
Yes, well, the pandemic make us to rethink some aspects that we used to have in our minds in one way. Transport is one of them because, as the other opponents mentioned, we are looking for safety, not only to transport now. So it's very clear that people is not in the street as before the pandemic. And the use of the bicycle, for example, in Lima is something that is happening now, and governments are also promoting this means of transport. I want to believe really that all these efforts from the government will be finished in a extent use of the bicycle in a national level. I think people now is more connected also with the environment. We are very clear now that people sometimes is the main problem for the environment, and not only in the traffic but also in other aspects of the environment. So in my personal opinion, it will be more promoted, the use of sustainable transport, maybe more the bicycle now. But then when the pandemic finish, I hope soon, the people will have the habit to use more sustainable means of transport. That's what I think personally.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Claudia, for that. And more or less in the same sense, Bernardo, how do you see carpooling now in comparison to, say, last year, with all the advances that have been made? Do you think that companies and cities are investing more in carpooling? Will they invest more in the future? We can see all the potential benefits and impacts that carpool can have, and all those empty seats going around. What do you think is the future of carpooling? Also considering a question that a person asked us about the safety and the cleanliness of the car, and obviously the worry of people of sharing a private car with somebody else, and the safety of getting infected.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, sure. Let's take the pandemic aside for a second to answer the first half. I'm definitely think that carpool is on a positive trend. It is gaining relevance both at user level and organizational level and at a government level that are understanding that the individual use of cars is not sustainable anymore. I mean, the traffic in the cities is huge. The productivity impact that has, the environmental impact is something that every day covers more relevance. So I definitely think that that trend is going to keep going, if not intensified in the future. But we are now in a special context. It's true that the pandemic have hit the carpool because people, of course, is worried about sharing close space with others, right? So that's especially true in the massive carpool service, but it's really different in the case of corporate carpool. And I will explain why. First, think in this case, if there's a colleague of you that you are going to meet anyways in your destination because they sit just across you in the same table, it's way better to share the ride to work with them rather than meet them at work after they shared a ride with thousands of people in the public transport, right? So given that the contact is going to happen anyways, there's a huge incentive to share the rides in a close community in order to avoid that other person being exposed, way more exposed in the public transport, right? So we are already seeing that, and there's a lot of demand from companies that are preparing themselves for to go back to work in the next few weeks or months. So I think that will impact on how people see this on the future as well.
I'm sorry, couldn't unmute it. Thank you very much, Bernardo, for that answer. And personally, I do think that there's a lot of potential for sharing, a private car, especially in this context. But also the bicycle is a great option. And we received some questions for Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos, there's a participant that asked, why do you believe Lima waited so long in order to set a plan for bicycles? Why just last year did we set this law? And do you think the promotion of bicycle use is accelerating this year? We know that people have changed from cars to bicycles. We see more people probably on bicycles or on foot on the road. Do you think this will continue? And why did it take so long to change?
Okay, thanks. Yes, I think that it will continue growing. And to answer the question, I think that our government has almost always had the habit of react rather than prevent. We will see this reality in natural disasters that are repeated year after year, like El Niño. But in the case of the bicycle, this health crisis has been the scenario that has led the government to take the bicycle as a solution. What we hope is that the plans and infrastructure made during the quarantine become permanent, and that this reality give us the conditions to show that the bicycle is a solution to many problems that affect us. That's what I think.
Great. And we just received one last question, Juan. Do you think that is it true that bicycles reduce mental stress and create a better mood?
Well, in my personal opinion, and because of many cyclists that I know who use the bicycle every day, I think that is totally true. I feel more happy. I feel a lot better when I ride my bike. Obviously, it's better when you ride safely and in good conditions, but in general, the bicycle is a good option if you want to relax yourself and be more healthy.
Yes, I think there's also a study about that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I read something about it. So I also, well, I'm 8 months pregnant, so I can't ride my bicycle right now. But I also know it to be true that you do get in a better mood, ride your bicycle to your job or to a place where you study, no? Especially because it's easy and there are short distances, and you're not really stuck in a traffic jam like most people, no? We've had several other questions coming through in the chat box, and I'm very sorry that we won't be able to address all of them because it's 4 minutes to 6. I just have one question for Gaby of Británico, and it's about the Británico's own sustainable mobility. If they have a question that somebody asked us was about if they had evaluated sustainable mobility within the Británico.
Thank you, Micaela. Yes, we did. We did last year, but we started with an urban mobility assessment for our staff. No? The main group use public transport, so we started initiatives to promote sustainable transport. And we, for example, signed the Sustainable Transport Agreement with the municipality of San Isidro, where our headquarters are located, and also had an agreement with the bike company to give discounts to our staff. And we had planned to do the assessment for our students this year, but well, we all know what happened, so we hope to do it as soon as we come back anytime this or next year. So yes, we're working on that.
Great, Gaby. Thank you very much for that. And I know Británicos has a lot of big plans for not only sustainable mobility, but in general sustainability. You know? We talked about recycling last month, and we'll be talking about other sustainability topics in the future. We've received the names and the email addresses of some people. Some people still haven't sent them. You still have a couple of minutes. I'm not sure, Gaby, if you want to do some closing arguments,
Yes, thank you, Micaela, Claudia, Bernardo, Juan, for your interest and to be part of this Británico Green community. Thanks to all the attendees. Definitely there is a strong relation between health and environment, no? And something we need to think about during this crisis is what is our commitment as citizens. So we hope we have inspired you and given important information for your good practices, and hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you very much to all. Stay safe. And before you leave, please, can you turn on your camera so we can take a picture? maybe Micaela, you can stop sharing
Sure.
your screen
Okay.
so we can see the
I'm
faces.
sorry.
No, don't worry.
Okay, let's see.
And don't forget to write your name and email in the chat box if you want to win the EcoPack.
Yes, and Juan Carlos says that everybody is invited to do additional questions to the Facebook of ACIPER. I guess Bernardo also, if anybody has any questions for Bernardo and All Right and Carpooling in general, you could probably go to their Facebook too. I know that we haven't been able to address all questions, but you can do so. And to Claudia in our Facebook of Bgreen too.
Okay, so we'll take the picture. One, smiles, please. 1, 2, 3. Excellent.
Great.
Thank you very much to all, and hope to see you in our next sessions next month and following the year.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye, good evening.